and twice attendee to the 21 convention.
Ryan Sylvain, I pastor a church out in Ogden, Utah. I have 6 kids and lovely wife, and I'm glad to be here today.
Richard Grannon, I am an author and content creator, and I am from the wonderful United Kingdom, and I'm very glad to be here in the colonies with you today, gentlemen.
All right, I want to start off with a really basic question. It's probably the hardest question we'll deal with. What is culture? Arthur.
From it.
Yeah, I was going to say, as Henry Van Til once said, culture is religion externalized. And it comes from the word cultus in Latin, from which we derive cult and cultivation. So it's all of the externalized social artifacts of a people's values, what they consider to be the good, the true, and the beautiful, expressed socially.
I actually don't know. Now that you've asked that, I'm sort of thinking, is it something that we're carrying from the past forward based in intergenerational trauma and also best practices, memories, and ability to interact with each other in certain modalities? The first thing that comes to mind when you ask what is culture is I think of the American philosopher Terence McKenna, who famously said, culture is not your friend. He was using a lot of psychedelics, though.
Well, I mean, I will agree that religion is the root of culture, and that's something I broke down a little bit in my presentation.
Yeah, you did. I think I probably take a little more general view, allowing for atheists to participate in the culture. Although y'all would say, and I would probably say with you, that they're inherently religious anyway. The culture is a set of shared stories, shared beliefs in a community. And those beliefs could be true or false. They could lead to good outcomes or bad outcomes, and that we can actually evaluate cultures that way. If we think about culture and politics, is there a difference between the two? What do you think?
Sure. Culture, I just see it's broader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And politics reflect the culture.
Okay.
So I would say that politics are downstream from culture.
All right.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? That's the conservative mantra, but they don't have any.
Don't associate me
active
with those guys.
participants, though, right?
That's right.
I want to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, yeah, again, Cleric Richard John Neha said that culture is the root of politics and religion is the root of culture. And I think that's the hierarchy.
Got it?
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is the interplay between culture as this broad umbrella, and then as it's expressed in the state politically, it's using the mechanisms of state power to achieve some cultural vision. But I think it's also important to recognize the prime importance. That's not to say that politics is unimportant, because politics are also pedagogical. Mm-hmm. Politics teach a people. They teach people what is good. Mm-hmm. So if for a long enough time you say something is legally bad, mm-hmm. people will actually believe that, and then that will also influence the culture. So there's an interplay there. Even when you recognize the hierarchy, we have to be careful not to cede politics and say, well, we'll just focus on culture. Well, no, you can't do that, because the state is going to attempt to enforce somebody's cultural vision on you. So you will need to have some sort of political answer. And I think that's an important part of the conversation as well.
Great insight.
Yeah, I like that. I think politics and policy, I think the root of that is the same as police, which is polis, which means the people. And so policy is a manifestation of best modes of practice. And we battle politically because one side thinks they have this policy that will work, the other side has a different policy. It requires a collective. This is all a manifestation of collective consciousness. No one individual can have a culture or politics. It's always collective, and it has to occur inside of a universally agreed space.
That's an also fundamental insight, right? That cultures are in communities. You know, one of the problems I've always had with Enlightenment thinkers is that they always begin from this man in a state of nature, and they sort of reason from this imaginary man in a state of nature, but man's never in a state of nature. Men are born into small communities called families, at the very least, right? And these families have cultures, right? And shouldn't the origin of Enlightenment thinking have been the family instead of this individual in this state of nature, which has never ever happened in human history? It's a very odd place. And I think if the thought of our society is dominated by these Enlightenment ideas, we're going to have wrong ideas about culture, right? So if we think it through and we look at culture in a community, can we say that men make culture? Or maybe I might say it a different way. You could interpret it this way too. Are cultures designed, or do they emerge somehow? What do you think?
I mean, I think that the whole characteristic of masculinity is what holds boundaries and objective standards. And I think it is our job as men to be architects of culture in the first place. So yes,
So you do think it is? Yeah.
Yes.
The one way that I like to look at culture to answer the question is men, I don't think can create culture. I think we're vessels of culture. Culture is kind of memetics, as in the Richard Dawkins meaning of the word meme, which is a kind of gene that's transmitted mentally. Right. Obviously, we think of them now as funny pictures on the internet, but the Dawkins version was this is the psychological equivalent of DNA. It self-propagates, it mutates, it changes. I think that we would like to be able to change culture. We should attempt to change culture, but I think we should give respect to the fact that culture typically has evolved unconsciously, primarily, and it's something we simply inherit, much like our language. We're sat here talking in English, which is a pidgin language of peasants that's the bastard child of 7 other languages from a very, very long time ago that until recently you couldn't even write in, and it's become the dominant language. None of us created English. We've received this. So I think we should try to change culture, but in all humility, remember that initially we were merely vessels for this DNA.
What do you think?
I think there's a distinction between truly creating something and making something, I guess.
Yes.
So we definitely participate in create culture, and then we write songs, right? We tell stories, we architecture and all that. So
Right.
I think we do participate in the creation of culture, but I think like just to go back to law, to politics for a second. People say you shouldn't legislate morality. Oh yeah. Well, what should we legislate?
Yeah, what else is
There's
Like
literally
what?
nothing
Like
else to
consensus,
That's what it's
opinion, the mood of the moment.
Right.
So and people say I believe in separation of church and state, but when I say that, I don't believe in separation of state and religion. Church is an institution, the state is an institution. Institutionally speaking, they're separate.
Right.
Right. But religion, there's no way to separate it from politics ultimately, because it influences what we think is right and wrong, what's ethical, what's fair trade, who we should interact with, who we should align ourselves with. All that stuff comes from an understanding of ethics and morality.
Right.
And so that's also why we're into a culture of death. When you get to a culture that prioritizes the individual and not the family, like take our economic system. Is it that surprising to us that our current form of economics is a guy that was a homosexual? Right, he had no view of the future, so it's a debt-based economic system.
Right.
So he's not really worried about passing on a legacy. So our practice at a personal level, in terms of what we believe in morality and all that, affects the art we create.
100%.
It affects the songs we write, the things we sing about. I mean, the music we listen to in our culture tells us exactly what we are. Until we change the culture, how will we ever get good leaders? We get the leaders we deserve.
This is exactly why I try to spearhead more creativity in our end. Because life imitates art. That's the reality. And I said, I've often said that everybody has something picturesque in their head that they're walking towards, and that was inspired through aesthetics. So that's really powerful, right? So we need to get into all the creative, influential spheres, right? And I think the politics will automatically bend in our favor once we do so.
One more thing on this, and I know this isn't the Manosphere and Religion panel, though that
pretty similar.
Yeah. I do want to say one thing though. Think of these churches that pop up and they build, basically like a pole barn, right?
Yes.
Okay, a pole barn can be done real quickly, doesn't cost that much. Cathedrals take 100 years to build.
Right.
A cathedral will not be finished by the person who started it.
Passed
Right.
down.
Right. So it's passed down.
Yeah.
So the problem, we have very small ambitions as a people in general.
Mhm.
This is really the problem with the conservatives. They have no future. They want to be left alone. They're all about individualism. Liberals do want to get together to build something.
Yeah.
And they're doing,
Yeah.
well, they're destroying something, and they're like parasitical in the nature that we build something, they take over, but we haven't been building anything for a long time. How do you have a culture war without a culture?
Mhm. Doug Wilson, baby. Yeah.
Right.
And when you think about the nature of man, because what we're talking about with culture is something peculiar. To think about what is chimpanzee culture? What is parrot culture? I mean, there's mating rituals, there's things like that, but humanity is we're like a cultural thing. We go out and we adorn and we glorify everywhere we go. And so we're always adorning and glorifying the things around us in accordance with some a priori vision or some antecedent vision for what is beautiful and what is true. So when you look at the artifacts of a people, they're telling you, this is what I think is true and important. When you look at our architecture, it says something. There's something, the old phrase, I think it was about, cathedrals, he who cuts stones must envision cathedrals. The reason that they were building those is because they wanted to say something architecturally about what they believed was true about the world and the future world they were aiming to make. And so if you want to get anything done anywhere, you have to start by actually having an aim, a cultural vision that you're aiming to, and it has to be a totalizing cultural vision that encompasses every part of what it means to be human, so that you can say, we're now aiming to engineer something particular. We're embarking on a journey towards a destination culturally. And, I think a lot of times, like you mentioned, Michael, mere conservatism fails to do that by simply reacting to enemies that pop up like whack-a-mole, instead of saying, let's throw the whack-a-mole machine down and we're going to do something completely different. And that will be our answer to the
So Brian,
ills.
you're an artist like me, right? So this is what I'm saying. Like, this is why conservatives lose.
Awesome.
We put all our eggs in spreadsheeting and pie charts, right? I mean, I shouldn't even say we, but and this is what I mean. Like when you said the individual nature of conservatives, they also look at an investment only based on the ROI in their bank account, rather than actually controlling the dreamscapes of your progeny, actually controlling the narrative. The left, they have ceded all that territory.
Well, I'll give you an example of this, a great example. Okay, so the way we try to deal with abortion is, and when I say we, I'm speaking of those that are conservative or right-leaning, is with stats. Right, this only a small percentage of these babies are actually from rape, which is true, right?
Yes.
So that's our tactic. What is the left's tactic? Well, let me show you. Look at this little or this little girl. She went through this terrible thing, and because of reproduction rights, she was able to not have to carry through with that pregnancy, and now she's a doctor and she's helping all these people. Right? In sales, you call it future pacing, but what it is it's this. They're giving you a story.
It's a
Right?
story.
Look at this story. Look how happy she is, and all that. And we're like, but numbers, right? And you're like, look, stats and all that stuff matter because we're talking about metrics, but it's whoever controls the story
Wins.
Yes.
wins,
Yeah.
and we don't control the story. That's why social media is dangerous to the leftists, and they're trying to control it because the people are starting to get the ability to tell stories again because everyone hates, the MCU. We're getting sick of that, where it's like every hero now has to be a woman,
Yes.
and you're going to take the manliness of Thor and make him into a big dummy,
Yes.
right? And a big fat dummy,
And there's two things we have to map out further in that regard, which is the first thing is that, these artists of faith or artists of tradition or those who want to save the West, they don't get the same patronage. That's the first thing. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is that's why we have to be so much better. We can't leave any stone unturned because, we actually have to be good and the art has to speak for itself. With them, they just want to demoralize everyone so they can put, it seems like the way we make fun of art at the 21 Summit is talking about the banana duct taped to a wall.
Yes.
So that seems to be like the go-to, right? So we have to be perfect, man. We gotta have strong art. The aesthetics have to be in line, formalism and contextualism, and we need to be our own marketers too. But the left, they have all this patronage, It's very
So
dangerous.
Let me pick up on that because, you know, the banana taped to the wall, or probably my favorite example was at the Met, a janitor accidentally threw away an art installation because he could not distinguish it from garbage that was left by patrons in the museum. And they had this emergency thing where they had to go fish it out and figure out how to put it back together. So, you know, given that that is the status of what passes for art, right?
Only a person
What-
who doesn't believe, you know, men and women, like only a person who believes gender is a social construct can actually believe that is art. That's the point. They're
Right.
demoralized.
Right. My question, though, is how did they capture the commanding heights of culture? Because I find it very similar to the transgender thing I'm going through, right? If you imagine the most totalitarian society you can possibly imagine, for me, that's something like North Korea. Just imagine 1984, whatever it is for you, right? Do you believe that you could torture a Christian father into believing that his son was a girl? I don't think you could torture him into
No
believing
way.
it. You could probably torture him into saying it. But could you torture him into believing it? I don't think so. But somehow we've got people believing trash is art. So where did that cultural power come? Because I think that's an unprecedented amount of cultural power that may not have existed any time in human history. How did that come about?
It's those who understand seduction. And, you know, look, we talked about pickup quite a bit in this convention. There's seduction for the sexual market value, and then there's seduction for greater culture.
Okay.
And that's done with propaganda.
Okay, that which was the subject of your talk.
Yeah, and propaganda is basically utilizing the creative class, and you do it little by little,
Mhm.
right? The reason why we have terms like, you know, it started with toxic masculinity, right? And we have the patriarchy, and women frivolously say men are trash,
Mhm.
right? Little by little, you can get more egregious, and that's how they do it. You know, little by little. You know, it's like that's why you can't let them. You can't let them. You can't give them an inch; they take a mile, right?
Yeah. This is what
Yeah.
Margaret Thatcher called the ratchet effect, right?
Yes. Mhm.
I published a little meme on Facebook, and it really upset a lot of Republicans in Texas because it had the transgender flag on one side and it said reject modernity. And then it had the gay pride flag and it said embrace tradition,
Yeah.
right? It's like conservatives so often simply ratify the previous victory of the left
Yeah.
and act as sort of the Washington generals to the fake opposition for their next conquest. But I'm curious, though, what do you think about how did they acquire this power? How did they get so powerful in the culture? How did that happen?
There's a human weakness, I think, which is that if you're trying to make things that are good and that stand out and stand upright, it's burdensome. And so there's an appeal, there's a seductiveness to just tearing everything down. And I think that's why back in 1850, when Marx released the Communist Manifesto, it became so popular. And I think you can trace from that point to now a real desire to deconstruct everything. And that's where you get this postmodernist movement that comes, you know, it uses elements of psychology and psychiatry to look at everything that is in the world, everything that has beingness, and call it evil. It's not that it's evil, it's to those weak, spineless individuals, it's painful, it's burdensome, and it induces narcissistic injury, and they would rather tear it down.
Narcissistic injury.
Mhm.
That is a fascinating term. It's really making me think here. Can you just speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, so if somebody actually has narcissistic personality disorder, they are in love with a completely fake, childlike, hyper-idealized vision of themselves. They know secretly that they're not that,
Right.
but they hold to it. Now, if you attack that vision or you show them that they're not that, then you've induced a narcissistic injury. You've
I
hurt
see.
it's like idolatry, it's like personal
Yeah.
idolatry.
Yeah.
If you hurt their idol, they will hurt you.
Right on.
And their rage is then they're induced into narcissistic rage, which is disproportionate and extraordinarily vengeful because you hurt their precious self-image.
Right. Can you talk about how they ascended to the heights of power where they could make people believe trash is art?
Yeah.
Which is just an unbelievable exercise of social power.
So I think there's a fundamental insight about the way that people are discipled to change that's important to see here, because you can attempt to, think of a communist revolution, where you from the top down via force attempt to impose a culture on a people, and completely disrupt everything that had come before, relocate everybody, kill an intellectual class, take their land, and what happens is that actually doesn't work that well. What's much more effective is leaven. If you've ever made sourdough and you've put yeast in a lump of dough, it's just, it's like a 1/4 ounce packet Fleshman's yeast or whatever it is,
Right.
Fleshman's yeast. And it changes every part of that dough, that lump of dough. Jesus uses this as an image of the world in his parables of the kingdom. He says that the gospel of the kingdom is like leaven that a woman hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. Well, socialism, communism, wokeism, they're all attempting the same thing where they slowly, degree by degree, capture institutions that shape culture. So, I mean, the earliest public education act in America was the 1647 Old Deluder Satan Act in Massachusetts that Protestant Puritans implemented, where if you got more than 50 householders, you had to start a grammar school so that all the children would learn to read so they wouldn't be deceived by Satan. That's the roots of public education in America, is to prevent deception by Satan, okay? How is that going today, right? Well, 200 years ago, we began these humanistic, massive, secularist sort of incursion into the institution of education that you can see run on universities, media, culture, monetary policy, et cetera, all the way down until every institution through this long, slow march is captured and then weaponized to implement a culture. So that's what I'm saying, is that these secular humanist kind of vision of humanity it's totalizing. It has an end vision for humanity it's trying to create, which is a statist people, where the state functions as God the Father.
Yes.
And salvation is submission to the state. All personal responsibility ceded to the state will manage things for you because you're infants who can't manage yourself. And I think the way that they did that was by capturing institutions and slowly shifting the Overton window, doing the push hard, take 3 steps forward, 1 step back.
So this is interesting because economic